Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hallway Fights, our deep dive podcast into the Marvel Netflix television shows. While we wait for The Punisher to arrive, which should be in about 3 or 4 weeks, we're working our way through some of the older Netflix shows, in this case, the first season of Daredevil. So I am joined today by a special guest and an old friend, David Lewis. Dave, say hey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Jason.
My pleasure. Absolutely. So, Dave, I brought you on because you are one of the comics field's experts on the topic of religion and superheroes, and you were nominated for an Eisner, you dog.
Lo and behold, yes, I got well, I was going to say the nod from the Eisner gods, but we didn't win that year. So is that just like the pat on the head from the Eisner gods?
Maybe it was like a side eye.
Yeah, I'll take it. Sure.
So that was for American Comics, Literary Theory, and Religion, the Superhero Afterlife.
Mouthful. Yeah.
It is a mouthful, but and you're very active on this field yourself. You're writing Kismet, Man of Fate, which is a web comic. Is that right?
Well, it starts as a web comic, right? Like we're letting people, give it to them free and then make them pay for the second dose. Right. It is free and online currently, 2 pages every week from A Wave Blue World, but it will be collected as a print trade paperback graphic novel storyline in 2018.
Who's your artist for that?
Noel Tuazon, also an Eisner Award nominee. You may have seen his work in either Elk's Run or more famously for Archaea, he did Tumor with Joshua Hale Fialkov.
Awesome. And how is that partnership working out with Kismet?
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the colorist and the letterer, Rob Cronenborg and Taylor Esposito of Ghost Glyph Studios.
Yeah.
They have been just so awesome with me getting to explore this character, getting to flesh him out in what I hope are unexpected ways. And they've just been truly great collaborators in the whole thing. They give it a real richness.
I've increasingly become aware as I teach comics and graphic novels in my classes, how much the digital format has really changed the role of the colorist.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Like so much of the art that used to be penciled in the old days is now all done by color. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so
and Noel has this great style, right? But it's naturally sort of or at least he chose to employ a scratchier style to this that stands well in black and white, but for the type of storyline I like to read, it's hugely enhanced by the colors and the letters, obviously.
Yeah. And now tell us why you picked Kismet, because it's not unrelated to our topic today.
Well, yeah, as you said, my background's in comic book scholarship, and I was doing research on what would be the next book, which is out now, a collection of essays edited by Martin Lund and myself called Muslim Superheroes. And the key question was, who was the first Muslim superhero? I knew there are plenty of Muslims in comics, plenty of Arabs in comics, but who had been the first identifiably Muslim superhero? And it was Kismet in 1944, but it was such a short run. He only had 4 adventures. In Bomber Comics in 1944. Bomber standing, of course, for the World War II planes, not anything Islamophobic.
Right.
And I kind of fell in love with him, right? And I had taken a big creative break from my graphic novel writing days and was looking to ramp back up again. And I wanted to bring this character out of the public domain, wanted to bring it back. And I saw a number of ways to do that if we sort of Captain America'd him, if we shoved him into the present.
Yes.
The catchphrase that we sort of seized on is he was around back when punching Nazis wasn't a meme.
Right.
So I'm getting to explore it in that way. It's more sophisticated than that, I hope. I think. But it definitely appealed to me hugely. And frankly, after also the Boston Marathon bombing and with the rise of Donald Trump's campaign and then administration, it's hitting the nail on the head, right? It's exactly the sort of character I want to explore this time with.
Jonathan!
Hey, I'm here. How's it going? Can you hear me?
We've already gotten started.
Hi, Jonathan.
My old phone into gear. And I found a quiet part of my campus, which I also didn't think I could do.
So, we're joined by another guest today, Jonathan Allen. I always say your last name wrong, Jonathan. Say it for me.
Alexandrados.
Alexandrados. Yeah, I was going to say it wrong. All right. So, Jonathan lives in New York. We met because you're one of the organizers of the Page 23 Literary Conference at the Denver Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
And you do a lot of writing and work on action figures and what we call in academia we call material culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I just call them toys. But
exactly.
Yeah.
In my neck of the woods, we call it material religion. You know, if you got like if you have one of those old 1970s ISIS superheroine action figures from the
Migos.
Yeah, if you got one of those,
oh my God,
we could write a whole essay on that for for material religion.
And
I think we should.
Yeah, right. I asked Jonathan to join us today because when Daredevil first came on, the first season first came on a few years back, you and I both were sort of both attached ourselves to that 8th episode of the series when we had the Kingpin, the Wilson Fisk retrospective. And we get his origin.
It stopped my heart, that episode.
Yeah, yeah. So I knew that when we got to that episode, I wanted to have you on, and so for those that are coming to the show, or that maybe you don't quite remember exactly, we're talking about the middle third, and a lot of these Daredevil, a lot of these Netflix shows have sort of been plagued with the idea of the middle third kind of drags, that it's the two towers of Netflix, and it always kind of drags, and we always wonder where's the plot and when's stuff going to happen, right. And sometimes it feels like padding. Yeah. But episodes 5 and 6 sort of wrap up the Russian plot line with Wilson Fisk having destroyed the Russians and framing Daredevil for it, and we get this really tight kind of couple of episodes with Daredevil trapped. And trying to get out, and then he gets Wilson Fisk's name and gets Owlsey's name so that he can start trying to unravel the situation. And then in episode 7, we get his origin story. We get Stick and the whole flashback and introduction of that. We get the Black Sky, which becomes very important later on in the Defenders series. Although I have to confess, as I've been watching it, I suspect that they didn't really know what they were going to do with the Black Sky after they invented it.
Right. What does the Black Sky do exactly? Well, yeah. We'll get around. It felt a little like a moment from the series Lost. We just know that the thing will be important.
I was just going to say that. That's why I've stayed away from. To be honest, I mean I haven't even seen the Defenders yet, because it was once I hit like episode 6 of Lost, I was kind of like, there's no way they're coming back to this. And at the end of Daredevil, that first season, I was kind of like, yeah, this is great. They're not going to come back to it though.
And then we get episode 8, which is the Wilson Fisk kind of origin story, where we learn all about him, and the big transformation moment where Daredevil has basically been working for 8 episodes to learn who the secret Kingpin is and to expose him. And then Fisk, under the prompting of Vanessa, just flips the tables on it completely and invalidates basically everything Matt's been working for over the last 8 episodes.
And I'm kind of wondering, I'm trying to reflect back to when I first watched this, before we had Luke Cage and before we had Jessica Jones in the second series. I'm trying to figure out if I felt the Netflix lag, the middle episode lag, when I first watched Daredevil. Because if you have Stick and Fisk's origins ready to go to fill that middle slot, I'm not sure I noticed the phenomenon the first time around.
Yeah,
I didn't notice it.
I didn't really feel like they started this, like they had that slowdown until Luke Cage.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I felt, honestly, when I first saw Daredevil, it was because I was sick and I was home with a stomach bug, and I was like, let me put this on because I paid for Netflix anyway. And the first episode, it ended, and I was like, okay, this was good. It felt a little slow to me, but I was like, there was enough there to cling on to and go for the rest of the show. But then once it hit episode really six for me,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is great.
Yeah.
And then episode 8 was one of the best episodes of TV I've ever seen.
Maybe this sounds like pandering, but it was the hallway fight in episode 3 that made me say, okay, I'm seeing this through. This is not embarrassing. This is now something I'm willing to finish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the hallway fight was so it looms so large in the mythology of the show that every subsequent show has had to have one. We've got hallway fights in every series after that, all the way through Punisher and Defenders. So
that's pretty much how they advertised the Defenders.
It's
they
exactly. It's like, okay,
the hallway fight.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because doesn't that just throw us back to Old Boy? I mean, isn't that the sort of your fight, like the hallway fight to end all hallway fight? Like, I feel like when I first saw that hallway fight, I was very impressed by it, but I was also like, it felt like it was summoning that scene from Old Boy where they kind of do the same thing.
Now, tell me, Jonathan, what you're talking about, because I'm an uncultured heathen and I don't know what.
Oh, no. So in the film Old Boy, which is Chinese, Korean, I have to look that up. But there is a really famous scene where the main character, called Old Boy, basically like takes a hammer and with a hammer just fights through like a hallway full of attackers, and it's really cool. And that scene in Daredevil just always reminds me of that.
For some reason, I'm recalling that scene was sort of an intentional homage to another scene. And
yeah, I think that's probably it.
That's probably it? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to retract or revise what I said a moment ago. Frankly, the treatment of battling Jack, even in episode 2,
yes,
proved to me that the show had promise. It was the hallway fight that made the series going forward exciting to me and kind of most fully realized. But I should say I wasn't skeptical even as far in as episode 3.
Yeah, and because the show is meant to be binged watch, I think that affected how we absorbed it. If it had been coming out every week, they wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the stuff that they did in the show.
Yeah.
This came up a little bit last episode when we had Gray Scott on, and you remember the scene? I believe it's is it episode 7 where Karen is talking to Miss Cardenas.
Yes.
She goes to Miss Cardenas' home, and they had this long conversation in Spanish, and Miss Cardenas describes the 2 guys that repaired her home, and there's a little conversation about Foggy, where Miss Cardenas obviously Miss Cardenas observes that Foggy is falling in love with Karen, and she says that to Karen, and Karen suddenly realizes, apparently she didn't before, that Foggy has a huge crush on her.
Because Karen is the most observant character in the Marvel Netflix universe. She really has acute skills of observation. Yes, she is talking about how Senor Foggy has a thing.
Yeah.
Has a thing
well, I mean, neither of them realize what I feel like is kind of the obvious fact of the one blind guy they know / the one blind superhero they know. There might be a connection there, but
I don't think they know that the superhero is blind.
Right.
I don't think certainly not this early on.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's true.
But yeah, so that scene, it's quite long, and the conversation goes on for quite a while. And as Gray was sort of mentioning in a previous episode, if this had been a regular television series that was coming out every week, they would have cut that. Like they would have felt, well, you know, we will lose the audience. But here, by the time we get to that episode, we're 6 episodes in. We're invested, you know, and they know they have. It's more like reading a novel where, you know, your author, they know that you're in for 300 or 400 pages, so they can afford to delay some of the gratification, you know.
And that's so interesting because I completely agree, and I totally agree that it would have been cut. But that scene has me thinking of plays and kind of those wonderful moments of intimacy that happen on stage. And,
well, we haven't even talked about that, but yeah, you're a playwright kind of by profession and occupation.
Yeah. And so when I saw that moment, especially because of the use of Spanish, like it was, I mean, it was really beautiful and I mean, really intimate, and it felt like one of those moments I could have been watching on a stage, and I feel like TV rarely goes there, movies rarely go there, and I mean, I get why, but there. I was really moved by that. It
did feel like a very theatrical moment. You know, when I was watching it, I also realized, as I was watching the episode, because in that same episode where we have the long, actually it's a slightly previous one, when we have when Miss Cardenas first shows up and she's in the law offices, and Karen is translating, and Matt is listening, and Foggy's there, and then we find out that Matt doesn't actually need the translation; he can understand her.
Right.
And then we switch, and we get an almost exact same scene with Madame Gao, the Kingpin, and Wesley.
Yes.
And I realized that Mrs. Cardenas is the Madame Gao duplicate.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm going to add to that. I'm going to pile on, and just with, you know, my wheelhouse being religious studies and so forth.
Yeah.
This block of episodes is probably the religion lightest of the episodes. He doesn't go back to see the priest, but especially after the first 4 episodes that are heavily sort of, well, not heavily, but more than one is accustomed to with religious iconography or considerations or scenes in the church. But while Matt is not overtly dealing in religious ideals here, I think Madame Gao's, for lack of a better term, I will call it mysticism, kindly. Yes. And Madame Gardena's devotion, you see pictures of Jesus on the wall, she screams out, Jesus Christo. I think they are what keep any religious overtones cooking, keep the fire going, even if Matt isn't dealing with them overtly at that moment. And it helps that he's called the devil of Hell's Kitchen in this block of episodes, but they do serve that further purpose, if not overt religiosity, then at the very least they keep reminding us of the non-secular as well. I
totally agree. And Mrs. Cardenas's crucifix on the wall reminds us that, hey, you're watching a story about a religious superhero. Yeah. So David, let's talk about that. So can you, like, how are people of faith, I get in this case specifically Catholic, people kind of portrayed on television and routinely? And is Daredevil Matt Murdock, is he normal in that portrayal, or is his portrayal different than?
I'm gonna put him above average.
Okay.
But not as the exemplar, not as the wow, we really tapped into the vein here. I think particularly in season 2, and that could be because season 2 gets a lot more, again, I'll go back to mystical or magical, or certainly not institutionally religious.
Yeah.
For that reason, sometimes the religiosity is quite surface, right? It is quite, he's just wearing the guise, so to speak, of a religious superhero rather than being one. That said, though, this is better than most. Okay. This shows that religion is an aspect of the character's life. Yeah. I like that it's not all consuming, right? That we don't have Catholic man running from.
I would watch that show.
Running from. I'm glad that we don't have him running from rooftop to rooftop, but at the very least, we do have him when he's thinking about issues of good and evil. Yeah. When he's thinking about what he's doing and how it distinguishes him from Fisk or from Madame Gao or from all the rest, he does think of it and frame it in religious Catholic terms. And that killing is an ultimate sin, and that there is evil in the world, and he cannot do nothing. Now, it gets to the point where I'm looking for religiosity all over the place, and you know the expression, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail?
Yes, right.
So I got to thinking, Wilson Fisk took Vladimir's head off. Is that a John the Baptist reference?
Oh, wow. Car door.
Yeah, with the car door. And,
how it happens in the Bible, too?
Sorry?
Doesn't it happen the same way in the Bible?
John the Baptist, exactly.
The car door?
Oh, no, not the car door part.
No, I'm kidding.
It's a chariot wheel, I think. No.
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah.
And I also wanted to think about, he describes the world on fire in episode 5.
Yeah.
Claire asks him what the world looks like to him, and he says all the fragments form a sort of impressionistic painting, a world on fire. Yeah. And then I had the damnest time thinking about, wow, are there any famous impressionist religious painters? And with the exception of maybe one piece by Gauguin, nothing came up to me. So what I'm saying is he gets into this game, right? I know it starts to sound silly after a while. He gets into this game.
What I'm thinking here is, like, this is a man who did his homework. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, yes, hi. I came to the knife fight with a gun. No, basically what I'm saying is I think we credit more religiosity to the Daredevil series than may actually be there, but there is a there.
Yeah.
And I think it is most obvious, besides him being a devil and the opening credits that have religious icons in them. I do think it nicely undergirds his thoughts on justice, that basically justice is his driving force, whether it is legal or super legal. In terms of good and evil. Going back to your original question, Jason, yeah, characters are not well defined usually in terms of religion. It's either there as a really awkward plot point, or it's not there at all. I have watched most of the episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I challenge you to tell me what Agent Coulson's religion is, if anything.
Right. They have a sort of token religious character on there now.
Well, that's what I mean. It's token, right? And Legends of Tomorrow is going to have a token Muslim superhero character coming on for their next season. Now, I hope it's not token, right? I hope it's dealt with really with some nuance and some tongue-in-cheek and some genuine, sincere moments. But that's not the trend. Daredevil is above average in making the religiosity part of the subtext rather than needing to shove it into the overt text. I'll say one last thing and then I'll shut up. When I say that this is subtext, I should point out that the first time we see Matt, he's in a confessional, right?
Yeah.
And we have this ongoing question mark for Netflix viewers, although maybe not a question mark for comic book readers, of where Matt's mom is, where she went. And religion will deal, without spoilering here, I will say religion will deal very strongly with what happened there. So I think it has some great religious linchpins.
Yeah.
But it's geez, like any Netflix Marvel show, inconsistent with how it threads that.
You know, so you're talking about the Born Again storyline, and it's set up at the end of Defenders, and one of the things that we do on this show is spoil the crap out of things.
Oh, okay, then fine.
Yeah,
it comes up in this block of episodes that we're looking at today.
Yeah, and I'm actually sort of uncertain about this, because if you remember, the whole point of Born Again, and John, have you read these comics? You know these comics I'm talking about?
I know them. Yeah, I haven't read them.
Yeah. Okay. So in the Born Again story, the whole point of it is that's when he becomes kind of conspicuously Catholic. That
right
before that point, his faith was not an issue. In fact, I don't even know if the character really expressed his religion or his faith at all. But then he gets almost killed by Wilson Fisk. He wakes up in the nunnery, and he's nursed back to health by his mother. And he kind of had.
Let's not bury the lead here. We find out that his mother joined the convent.
Yeah, right.
Maggie didn't want to remain married to Battling Jack, if they were even married. I actually would need to check that. I don't know if it was out of wedlock or not.
Yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, so we find out that she's been a nun all this time, and he recognizes her. But we have a problem then,
Yes.
because Matt is already Catholic.
Yeah.
So if you're going to put him through the Born Again storyline, you lose the whole transformation from regular Daredevil into Catholic Daredevil.
Yeah, I suspect there's going to be a different transformation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think of it this way. If you've been following the Marvel movies, it's not Hank Pym that created Ultron. It's Tony Stark that created Ultron. Right. And the creation of Ultron will serve sort of a purpose for reshaping Tony's character, such that he's on a strange side for Civil War if you watched Iron Man 2. Okay, dump all that. Yeah. If Matt is going into this already Catholic, this will either make him, sorry to do this again, super Catholic, or it'll have some other transformational property. It may, after what they went through in Defenders, right, with Dragon Bones and Kunlun and all this stuff, it may actually reattach him to Catholicism.
Well, I would like to see him stop torturing people.
You'd like to see Daredevil stop torturing people?
Yes, I would.
But it works. It works so well.
Gets the job done.
He tortures the guy with Claire's help in episode 3 or 4,
and we find out that he's in a coma.
Yeah,
he lived, but he put the guy in a coma.
And he does it again in Defenders. And I would like to see him refine his moral center a little bit. I guess the show is probably thinking they have to keep him dark.
Right.
But I see Born Again as an opportunity to maybe shed that aspect of the character, which I'm uncomfortable with his behavior.
I think they're going to have to with Punisher coming up, because seeing the preview to that feels like an incredibly dark, heavy show. So and I feel like dialing back here would be smart. You
know, you bring up something which was big on the news this last couple of weeks since we had our last episode. Was New York Comic Con, and there was originally a big Punisher event planned at New York Comic Con, and it was days after the Vegas shooting tragedy, and Marvel canceled the event and didn't show the trailer, and presumably this was out of some sort of sensitivity towards the shooting victims in Vegas. But of course, as everybody here knows, there's a mass shooting, every week in America somewhere. And it makes us wonder if there's ever going to be a good time for the Punisher series. But they filmed it, so we're going to see it.
I'm gonna actually take the other side of that, and I am not a gun rights activist. I am hugely into gun control. In the same way that you just said every week there's
Yep.
practically a mass shooting. That means
Yep.
that every week is the right time for the Punisher series. I think we should
Right.
hold it, sort of hold it up as, are you not entertained?
Right.
If we're waiting for a time where guns don't offend us, right? Don't shock our sensibilities. That time is never going to come.
No, that's a good point. It's really going to depend on how the show portrays it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm afraid of is that it's going to glorify it.
Yeah.
Which doesn't need to be what the country needs right now. But
yeah.
I guess
yeah,
we'll
exactly. I mean, well, it's tough to say because all I could ever comment on is based on the previous two Punisher movies. The first one I actually liked, but I know I'm the only person in the universe who liked it.
Not the
And
only one.
Thomas Jane?
Yeah, the Thomas Jane one.
Okay, all right.
And the second one was absolute laughable nonsense, but that was fun too. They blew up a parkour guy with a rocket launcher. I mean, how could you not like a movie that does that?
All right, so we're getting pretty. Here we are. We probably talked about the show at all, but yeah. So
Yeah, right.
So they do in episode 7 when we meet Stick, right?
Yes.
They do continue to keep the question of Matt's mother in the air.
Yes.
And they do that by a nun
explaining
to Stick that the mother isn't dead, but she's well. That's another story. And if you have your antenna up, you might connect that back to Jack making that phone call to someone, but you might assume someone that's half in of Matt's life, half out of it. Because I did my homework, let me do this one thing, if you don't mind. That if you link the two, right, and you're listening to the episode 2 phone call as going to this nun mother, as this absent mother who's become a nun, and you listen to what Jack has to say, he says, Maddie's going to need you now more than ever. Look after him, okay? I know what I'm asking here, but he's a good kid. He sure as hell didn't get that from me.
Right.
Again, hammer, everything's a nail. That sounds like a prayer to me.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
That if you don't know where this is going, if you don't know this is going to an absent mother or even a mother who turned into a nun, it sounds like, especially with it being one-sided, him just on the phone and leaving a message, it sounds like a prayer.
Yeah, it does.
And that's what I want to connect back to. When Stick enters, does Stick move him away from Catholic Daredevil to be a disconnected warrior, right?
Well, that would follow yes. The answer to that would be yes, right?
So I think it makes sense that this block of episodes sort of lacks the religiosity that we want to credit Daredevil with, because I think Stick is siphoning it away.
Yeah, I agree. So, Jonathan, talk about episode 8.
Go for it. You're in.
Oh God. Oh,
Kingpin.
that. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the way that. Well, first of all, the fact that it comes after episode 7, where we get so much of Murdoch's kind of background and backstory with Stick and everything like that.
Yeah.
Then we get launched into Wilson Fisk's backstory, which turns out to be this like family drama. That I mean, getting back to theater, like that could be a play. I mean, and that reminded me of a lot of themes in like Eugene O'Neill or something. I mean, it's just like, wow, this abusive past that he suffered and how that built him into this character. It almost, I mean, I left that episode not even really sure if he's a quote supervillain anymore. Like I just was like, oh, I get it. Like I get that, sure. And the fact that it all revolves around really that one painting that he loves because it resembles the wall in his childhood house. I mean, my God, that was so powerful. It was so humanizing.
There's that scene where his father says, okay, stare at the wall and think about what kind of man you want to be. Right. So that's what he does every day. When he wakes up and he looks at the wall and he imagines the kind of man he wants to be. And he remembers that scene that he's trapped in that moment. As we see when he right before he turns out the light, when he sees his 11 or his boyhood reflection covered in gore.
Yeah,
he's stuck in that moment.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, to be honest, I think a lot of men are. I mean, I think that who have that kind of background. I mean, certainly for me growing up, there was a very clear definition of man, and for a lot of people I know, there was a very clear definition of that, and it was something that you became. It was something that you became by being hard and emotionally, physically, every kind of way.
Yeah.
And it was relatable, and I did not expect that.
Before we get the origin reveal of the Kingpin of Fisk in the episode, I kind of wonder, can you think back to when you first watched it?
Yeah.
What you thought the significance of the white painting was before we got him pointed at the wall by his father? Like, what were we as viewers reading into the wall before its significance to him is real?
Well, it's a great question, and what I remember is when Vanessa asks him in the gallery,
right,
how does it make you feel? And he says, it makes me feel alone.
Right.
So that's what it was to me. It was a representation of his solitariness. He's the rabbit in the snowstorm.
Sure.
Right? I alternated between that and confusion over just sort of admittedly saying, I don't know where that's going, and a little bit of is he kind of saying that to in some way, hit on her or something, or get her, and be like, oh, I feel so alone. She's like, oh, okay, well, I'll pay more attention to you then. I mean, that kind of tropey kind of way. But I mean, I know like that's clearly not it at all. But yeah, no, I just love the fact that it took so long before we got that story. I mean, because that reveal of the painting where he says that it makes him feel alone. Was that like the first or second episode or something?
It was really early.
Yeah, I think it was the third or maybe the third or fourth, but yeah.
Yeah. And then I mean, Kingpin in the comics anyway, certainly being a character who routinely dressed in all white, it almost as if he's a piece of that wall. What kind of man did you want to be? Well, I didn't become a man; I became the wall.
That's good. No, I like that. In fact.
Whereas in this show, he's always wearing the same black suit and the same black on black striped shirt until Vanessa comes in the next morning and sort of works this transformation on him. And D'Onofrio is so brilliant. I love like the look on his face when she picks the gray suit for him. And he can't say anything because they're playing that music again. That wonderful music that I will forever now associate with Wilson Fisk bashing his father's brains in with a hammer.
Yes.
And,
seriously.
and she shows him the gray suit instead of the black suit, and he gets that look on his face like, you're shitting me, right?
There's stuff here that only an actor like Vincent D'Onofrio can pull off.
Oh yeah.
There's the voice, obviously.
Yeah.
But he's got a line in this episode that I'm thinking, in the hands of just like of an incapable actor, this would have sounded cartoonish. Yes. He's like yelling at her, and he says, "I'm not a monster."
Yes, right.
Am I? Right.
Am I? Yeah.
Right.
And I was like, "Wow, you played that well," and it actually made you say there's really just a little boy in that huge man. The gore-covered little boy is what we're hearing in this strange adult coarse inflection on things.
Yeah.
And I got to give D'Onofrio credit for sticking with it. It makes me want to go to the second season of Daredevil to see if he really kept it up or if he was riding on the laurels of this season.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole idea that this is the man-child playing the role of Kingpin rather than self-assured businessman, or that they can be one and the same.
Jenny Blank, who was our guest last episode, really brought a lot to helping me understand the portrayal of Wilson Fisk in the show as someone with Asperger's.
Ooh, that's pretty good. Yeah.
That he, and this is because it's all part of the mirroring. Because as you know, in comics, it's not like this. But in comics, a hero can have a lot of villains, and there's not like the one archenemy villain that's got to be your exact opposite. The way that there does in television and film, which is kind of obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And so Wilson Fisk is made to be a mirror image of Matt Murdock in many ways, and all the way down to the Mrs. Cardenas, Madame Gao parallel.
One kills his father, the other has his father taken from him.
Exactly. And we don't find that out until the end, until episode 8, but also the disability issues. So that when, and I really saw this when Fisk is talking to Vanessa in the art gallery, and he has that weird moment where he like sort of steps up towards her one step, sort of says something, and then he's kind of rejected, and so he steps back again, and he's really kind of physically uncomfortable in public and the way that he speaks, and this is his disability. He's on the spectrum. He's on the Asperger spectrum somewhere. And apparently, which I did not know, there's a large community and conversation about this, and a lot of audience members who are on the Asperger spectrum sort of identify with the character because of that.
I'm not going to debate against that. In fact, I find that really kind of enticing.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, though, is this a character who is on the spectrum and had traumatic childhood?
Right.
Or could this be the result of traumatic childhood?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we don't really, I don't know if we can really answer it, because the time that we see the kid is he's so traumatized by his father being around that we don't really get an idea of what the kid's life is like when his father isn't around.
Yeah, and I think we also run a risk when we put him on the Asperger spectrum of sort of saying, like, you see, and he's the villain, and he's got Asperger.
I get that,
like,
but see, I see exactly where you're coming from, Jonathan, but I want to go back to your own comment earlier or is he the villain?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
The character is portrayed in such a sympathetic light.
Right.
And he defends himself, because D'Onofrio defends himself pretty well. Like, I'm trying to make the city a better place. Now, he also will kill anybody he has to kill, and he took off that one guy's head with a car door.
Yeah.
So he is a monster, but like all the great villains, he doesn't think he's a monster. He thinks he's the hero of his own story.
Yeah. No, it's true.
We do get, this block of episodes does give us the first talk between Fisk.
That's right.
And Matt. And it's Fisk that's trying to convince him. It's trying to convince Matt that you are like me. We are like each other.
Yes.
And it's Matt that's denying it. And the way I read the scene, and I'm open to argument here on this, is it's Matt that's in the weaker position. He's less certain that they aren't cut of the same cloth, especially I think this is also the sequence when Claire was talking about him when on that rooftop that time. You said you liked it, like beating up people. Yeah. And he says, I was just doing that to freak the guy out. Yeah. And she's like, are you sure? Sure there wasn't some truth to that? But I like that Matt is in the defensive position of saying they're not alike, rather than this Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker moment.
Yeah, Matt definitely comes off on the worst end of that conversation. And I think you can tell that when they're talking about the Russian guy, they're talking about Vladimir. And in the conversation, Fisk realizes that Vladimir hasn't actually told Matt anything yet. And he says that, which means he hasn't told you anything yet. And Matt's like, shit, I can't believe I gave that away. Like, he's all, and so he's totally on the underside of that. I love that conversation though, because it reminds me of the Indiana Jones Belloc conversation in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, you're my dark side.
You and I are not so much different. You and I, and that's when Harrison Ford looks at him and says, "Now you're getting nasty."
Yeah. I remember that. But you know what I'm also realizing here? Fisk is on the more psychologically assured side of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And Matt gets played in a way no lawyer should ever get played. And I'm thinking that he forgot to be a lawyer here. He was so busy sorting out his daredevilness
Yeah.
Right? I'm a hero. I'm not a bad guy. Blah, although he says he's not a hero. He's just a good man trying to do something. Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But he says, I'm so not a bad guy. I'm so not a bad guy that he turns into a bad lawyer for a few minutes.
Well, and that just gets worse in season 2.
True.
Which and I, this is not our spot to talk about season 2, but I loved the first season so much, and I wanted to see things. I wanted to see Matt get his life straightened out, and instead it just went into a tailspin from the first episode to the last.
I mean, that was my concern with season 2, because once you start introducing characters like Elektra and the Punisher, I face palmed, because I was just like, oh, well, now we're going to lose these moments of, real development with the characters that you have. I get why they'll do it, but I just thought when I saw that was on the slate for season 2, I was just like, well, we're not going to see too many episode 8s.
Well, he does develop. He just doesn't develop in ways that I personally wanted to see.
Right.
But we'll see. And one last bit about the 8th episode, which I have to say is my favorite line in the entire series, which is "Get the saw."
Yes. Yeah.
Get the saw.
Kidding, right?
Because we don't know how the mother's going to react. That's the beautiful thing. Like, the kid goes berserk, and he not only kills his father, but he quotes his father while killing him. Right.
Right.
And then there's like that moment of suspense. We're like, okay, what happens next? And the mom, she sort of looks up, and she doesn't look at the camera. She kind of looks around and says, "Get the saw." And that's when we realize, oh, it's going to be that story.
Yeah.
They're going to have to chop the body up into pieces. And it becomes this really grotesque kind of urban horror story.
I will add that, but it also shows that he's not all his dad, right? It shows that his mother had this reserve, this emotional reserve in her, and this pragmatism, that he doesn't have to be entirely defined by the failed Fisk. He could be for his mom. I was thinking just a minute ago when I was saying that Daredevil turns into a bad lawyer for a few minutes. I don't think we have a lot of examples in the Daredevil series. I'm racking my mind here, showing that Matt is an excellent lawyer. I mean, for all we know, he is a poor lawyer.
Well, this is very interesting, because this is actually a recent plot point. So, and I've forgotten his name, and if I'm sure he's not listening, but if he is, I'm so sorry. But one of the recent writers on the book is a practicing lawyer. And they brought him in, and he wrote a story in which Matt tries to change the laws in New York so that masked superheroes can testify.
Cool.
Oh.
And so he has to. So it becomes his lawness, his lawyerness, is really the main heart of the plot. And it's an attempt to can I create social change in the world? Can I make the world a better place with my lawyer half, as well as my costumed vigilante half?
When you were asking earlier about how does the series do with this character being a quote religious character, and I said above average, I think that it hits about the same grade. If you were to ask, how does this series do with depicting a lawyer character? Is it better than Ally McBeal? Is it better? Is it better than
that
Law
dancing
and
baby
Order?
shows up?
The dancing baby. Oh, that's a deep cut. That's way back.
I know.
So I think we're in sort of the same spot here, where we see about as much lawyerliness in his life as we do religiosity.
And all of that is very much tempered by the narrative demands of the show and the writers, right? Like they're willing to they add Catholicness when they feel that it makes a good story, and they cut the Catholicness when it's not relevant to the plot. And they do the same with the lawyerness, right? It's like it's like a plot point, and
Mhm.
I think that the desire to portray these characters sort of accurately to their faith or to their profession is less important than telling a good story.
Well,
I
yeah,
agree.
and I think honestly, to act as proof of that, we have a body of merchandise that represents the show now, and
So, yes,
a
I'm
lot
glad
of
you
it
brought this up. Thank you for
Yes.
bringing me back, because
is,
I remember you writing me saying, "Please let me talk about the action figures for this show."
yeah, well, of course, because you said when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have an action figure, everything looks like more action figures. um, so, but it's true that like when you look at the toys for the show, so there's a Marvel Legends wave of figures now that is basically, it has the Daredevil in it from the TV show,
Yeah.
and it's him suited up. They released several other kind of Daredevils before that from the comics. One of which was kind of interesting because it came with the head of the of a dehooded Matt Murdock. So what you can do is like you can take your Agent Coulson body and put the head on that.
Wait a minute, I'm losing Jonathan
Oh,
in the
sorry.
wind.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try to get to a better spot. Is that better?
A little better, yeah.
Little better. All right.
Sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
No, not at all. That's important. You can get the Matt Murdock head and with one of those Daredevil toys and put it on your Agent Coulson body, so he's got the suit, and it looks like Matt Murdock's going to court, and but you can make it that way. But the toys, repeatedly show us that kind of what they're emphasizing is the superhero story. I mean, there isn't an action figure of like Foggy. I mean, you can get one as a mini-mate. Mini-mate is really good at making those things, but there's not even a Kingpin. I mean, or Wilson Fisk. I mean, you won't find that yet, except for mini.
But you will find. I just Googled this, so I'm not going to pretend I have the depth of expertise that you do, Jonathan. But you will get Daredevil with a huge standing cross in the background.
Yeah, that's true. That's from the yeah, I know that was an earlier release. That Daredevil though, is that in his in the TV shows?
No, I think it's out of comics, and I think it's out of the Kevin Smith reboot era.
Yeah, I was gonna say like there was something like that made for the Ben Affleck movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
did they do a Daredevil figure with him in the black vigilante outfit?
So no, I mean they never did a widely released one like that. Unfortunately, I would have liked it. There were a lot of customizers who actually made that, but they never did an official one in like a Marvel Legends type.
Now, does that speak to anything in your studies, Jonathan? That when the fan base and the customizers are delivering things that the corporate entities aren't, does that reveal anything about either what's being overlooked or what's being missed about what it's essential to the character that fans latch onto?
Yeah, usually. Well, what's been happening lately, it feels as though, and the only proof of this I have is kind of a correlation between when a pretty well-known customizer posts video or photos of one of his or her customs, which is like a really cool custom, and then cut to 8 months later, oh, there's an official, Hasbro release of that, and it looks fairly similar. So there does seem to be some paying attention to the customizer community from Hasbro, but that isn't always the case. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of like several Wolverine figures that customizers made that looked really cool, and then they happen to come out. But with Daredevil, I mean, it seems like we've got the one, as far as the show is concerned.
And if you're a woman watching this show, if you're in the female audience for this show, and you're identifying with characters like Claire and Karen, there is no action figure for you.
No, and I mean, like I said, the only option you really have is Mini-Mates, and Mini-Mates did put out a Karen. I think there might be a Funko Pop, but maybe Funko usually does a pretty decent spectrum of characters, but yeah, I mean it's a huge problem because the representation of female characters in action figures is extremely lacking, and it always has been. Granted, it's getting a little bit better now, but
is there a Jessica Jones figure?
Yes, and so that's the thing. Jessica Jones came out in the same wave as Daredevil, which is a very recent Marvel Legends wave, which is kind of baffling because in that wave you'll get Daredevil, you'll get Jessica Jones, but the others you get, it's not Luke Cage, it's Blade. You'll get a Blade figure in that. And you will put together, if you get all the figures in the wave, you'll have enough pieces to build a Man-Thing figure. Yeah.
Gotta catch them all.
You gotta catch them all, exactly. Which I was quite happy about because I love the recent Man-Thing comics. But
it's interesting because one of the things that we found out about a month ago or so was that the most viewers watch, the most common first show is not the one we're reviewing. It's Jessica Jones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's because the male audience is just split. If you're a guy and you want to watch superheroes on television, you have a lot of choices. Whereas if you're a woman and you want to watch superheroes on Netflix and you want a female character, your options are a lot fewer. Right? Yeah. And so that audience gets concentrated. And Jessica Jones gets higher ratings because of that.
It also helps that it was good. It also
was good. And it was smartly cast because it brought a lot of Doctor Who fans over.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's absolutely good. And then but then people go from Jessica Jones, they go to Daredevil. Mm-hmm. But if they watched Luke Cage first, they don't go to Jessica Jones, who's a major plot point for Luke. They go to Iron Fist.
Yep.
Which tells us that they're comic book fans that just want to see heroes for hire.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. And I mean, even in the toy community, I mean, there's a craving for those figures, like, because there is an Iron Fist action figure out there. It is not an Iron Fist from the show, and there is a Luke Cage out there, and it is not the Luke Cage from the show. Right. So you don't really have anything in that regard yet. I'm assuming Hasbro feels as though they'll be big sellers down the line, although I don't know what they're waiting for.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I think we have to acknowledge is I think that the Jessica Jones and Daredevil first seasons were kind of the high point for Marvel Netflix. Yeah. There's been a kind of general perception that the shows since those times have not been as good. They've kind of been disappointing.
Well, I do have to say that when we were talking before about the lag, the middle episode lag, the first time I noticed it, like without reading up on it, but felt it, was in Luke Cage, which I thought started off so strong and was awesome and disorienting, and then settled into a rut. So I wonder if if the success of the shows has something to do with how well they hide the middle rutness of it, the 13 episode demand.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to have good. I see this as a writing problem. Mm-hmm. That is, our writers on this season, they knew, like, okay, let's save some important stuff for the middle, and let's build some really great episodes around it. And not just the origin episodes, but also the whole flip that Daredevil spends the 8 episodes trying to expose Wilson Fisk, only for Wilson Fisk to expose himself.
Ew.
So to speak. And but then I totally agree with you on Luke Cage, where it starts off as this really intelligent defense of Black literary culture and Black music culture, and I'm like, this is great because I'm so not the audience for this.
Exactly. That's right.
And then but by the time that we hit about episode 6 or 7, it's just another, like, he's fighting his evil brother, and I'm like, what?
Right.
Right. Right. I mean, I do think that that problem is something we see in plays all the time,
Good.
modern plays, and I think that it's connected because there are a ridiculous number of playwrights being hired as writers on not just these shows, but in TV in general, modern TV in general, and I wonder if there's a discussion that could happen about, that's great, and personally, I feel great about that. But
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a conversation that needs to happen about, okay, so now those of you who had plays are writing for the screen. What problems might you be bringing over from the stage that might all of a sudden look bigger on the small screen because you've got, instead of 90 minutes, you've got 13 episodes.
Yeah.
So if you lag a little bit on stage, it can kind of be forgiven. If you do it on TV, well, that's a whole couple episodes there.
Interesting.
And
can I ask a global question? I know we're getting towards the end of our time.
Yeah, we gotta go soon. Yeah, go ahead, yourself.
One thing stood out in episode 7 with the stick episode.
Yeah.
He gives Matt a piece of advice that I think, if we're coming from the superhero genre, if we're superhero enthusiasts, we want to argue against.
Yeah, we want to push
but it may be very good advice. It may be actually the most pragmatic advice.
Yeah.
He basically is telling Matt, to be just the pure warrior.
Yeah.
If you surrounding yourself with soft stuff isn't life, it's death. Cut it loose, all of it.
Yeah.
And he's suggesting get rid of your friendships and get rid of your material possessions and get rid of your sideline job and just be pure warrior. Now, that would not be a fun show to watch. That's not the Daredevil I want. But narratively, if you're inhabiting this universe, is it good advice? Would it actually have been more fulfilling, or at least prevented a lot more catastrophe if he took this advice?
This is one of the conversations and questions that superhero comics asks itself a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of one of the underwriting preoccupations of superheroes, where they, there's I know I'm going back into the back issue bins here, but there's an old DC Comics issue. It's an annual with Batman, The Question, and Green Arrow. Mm-hmm. And Question's trying to sort of balance out his life, and he's trying to have a personal life and stuff. And Batman shows up, and he's like, "You can't act this. You have to be it. Like, it has to be who you are." We find out later by the end of the issue that it probably wasn't actually Batman. It was probably the Question having a hallucination. But that's just the kind of book the Question was at the time. But yeah, so this is a kind of a classic superhero issue, and Batman's a great example of the guy that's like, my entire life is about being this, but he can't help but create a surrogate family around him.
That's right.
Because here's the problem with the narrative, and you're approaching this from a writing standpoint. Like, okay, well, so doesn't it make sense for you to be super isolated? Well, yes, it does make sense, but here's the problem. The audience can't identify with you, right? You lose all sympathy from the audience when you you lose your humanity.
Well, unless that's actually quite flattering to the audience. What if we're supposing that the audience is a bunch of Netflix misanthropes, right? Who are more Fight Club enthusiasts than they are superhero enthusiasts.
The obvious answer to your question is we're going to see next month when Punisher starts.
Well, that's a very good answer. That's a fine answer.
That is the other side of the coin, and that conversation is one that the Punisher and Daredevil have in what I think are the best parts of season 2. The first 4 episodes of season 2 is a jewel. It's like Punisher and Daredevil for 4 episodes, just like talking about their different life choices, and it's with bullets and kicking, and it's great.
Well, I will say, I mean, on that idea, I think there's a sense of, especially in the example of the annual you pointed out, if there's a question of, is being a superhero inherent, meaning are superheroes born or are superheroes made? Sure. And is that something that you just sort of learn over the course of your life? I mean, and I think that conversation falls into our society all the time of, are smart people born? Are smart people made? I mean, all of those kinds of psychological questions.
Well, I'm going to fall back on Shakespeare. Some heroes are born great, some are made great, and some have greatness thrust upon them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. And I think in Daredevil, there is such a punishment for being new most of the time. Like a lot of newbies kind of are shown to have it really rough, and some of them don't survive. I mean, talking about like cops who are new cops, or even new lawyers, or it's tough to be new at something in Daredevil. So I think there has to be a sense of yep, I've been doing this for a while. That's why I'm good.
And let me just add that we have a new political candidate, Wilson Fisk, entering the public spotlight in a pre-Trump age.
Yes.
Before the idea that, oh God, how do I say this? Before the idea that, well, someone like Trump could be successfully elected. I'll just leave it right there. We have an erstwhile supervillain moving out of the shadows, looking to get elected, and it looks feasible, but the audience at home at this time is going, that's never going to happen. Of course not. The politics doesn't work that way. Democracy doesn't work that way. Watching it now, I'm like, wow, yeah, he's got he's going to have name notoriety, and he's got he's got money behind him. I don't need to take money from anybody. Watching it in this political climate is so different than watching it the first time around.
Though I will say, if Wilson Fisk ever hosted,
I should wrap up. We've kept you guys for over an hour.
That sounds good.
Thank you so much, both of you, Jonathan and David, for joining us. For those of you that are listening, thank you for tuning in. Check out the Banff podcast, our sister podcast. We will be back with another episode of Hallway Fights where we finish off Daredevil just in time to zero in on the Punisher and hopefully answer this question of, is it wise to separate yourself from all lesser distractions and concerns, to cut off all of your family and not sleep in silk sheets when you decide to be a superhero? All right, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jason. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jason. Bye.